Welcome to the Second Plan A podcast, where we dive deep into the art of navigating life's twists, turns, and sucker punches. I'm Amber Hoover. I'd rather stick to the plan.
And I'm Ryan Hoover, and the freedom is in the planning, not the plan.
Ooh, interesting twist there. I dig that. So today we are moving on to our second Plan A. On this episode, we are throwing overhands at overreaction. From individuals to society as a whole, we are looking at the tendency to overcompensate and throw the pendulum back to the other side as hard as possible. Are you ready to start swinging?
Always. Yes, absolutely. Let's go.
I feel confident now that you are writing a note just off of the introduction. So hopefully everyone at home is also already taking notes. I'm going to start this off in absolute left field with communism.
Okay.
Marxism. The idea that everyone should share wealth equally, which doesn't at first sound like an overreaction, but in reality, it's tragically so an overreaction to capitalism because it ignores and forgets that wealth is generated by having incentives to gain wealth. The people who create ideas and can bring that wealth to society want to be able to get rich from their ideas. So if we look at these two extremes of sorts, not calling capitalism an extreme, but capitalism compared to communism, where you can see where that pendulum could just get tossed from one side to the other without people to govern reasoning and start finding that balance point. It's tragic lows and then extreme highs that are going to be hard to break a cycle from.
Yes.
Okay, good. We're off to a good start. I don't know if you were ready for me to start straight into.
I wasn't ready for socio-economic, political kind of dualities.
Keep them guessing.
Yeah. So if we stay with communism for a minute, communism would be, an overreaction to some sort of likely trauma, I would think, Now, if we get too far in the weeds, I mean, it could be just, this is a way that I want to control people.
Sure.
But I think if we take it at its idealistic kind of origins, it's probably based on, just like any overreaction, it's probably based on some trauma that caused somebody to say, okay, we need to fix this. And I think as humans, we tend to run towards the absolute extreme when we are, especially if it's an emotional trauma that really kind of dings us, and lingers and sticks with us. And if we kind of harken back to the last episode, if we've got some bit of the 3 Ps, especially if it's like the pervasiveness of learned helplessness, then we start to run so far to the other side because we don't think that small things are gonna make a difference.
We've talked about that before as well.
Yeah.
We like to think, and the Hollywood narrative is that if you go back in time somehow and you make a small change, it greatly affects the future.
Right.
And yet we don't see how a little change right now can compound over time and make a big effect later on.
Yeah, overreaction is an interesting one for me. And if we kind of tie it to what we do, fighting, I think we can give a very simple example that really illustrates how overreacting works. If we're sparring and I catch you in the liver, so I throw a left hook to the liver, it stings. You feel it. Maybe you feel a little nauseous, you feel a little sick, you take a knee, whatever. And a week later, I fake a liver shot. I'm almost for sure going to get a big reaction from you because of the trauma from the week before. That's why fakes and feints work, right?
Right.
If I have to establish a precedence of a pain point for a fake or a feint to work, you have to be afraid of the thing that I'm showing you in order for me to get that big reaction. So if I throw a left hook to the body and it doesn't cause pain or discomfort, you don't care about it, then a fake or feint won't work. But if I throw that left hook to the body and there is a pain penalty, you do hurt from it. You are traumatized by it. And if anybody's never been punched in the liver, you will be traumatized by it. Then at least the next time and maybe for several times after, and maybe forever, depending on, how much time you're putting in. The likelihood is pretty high that I'm going to get an overreaction to a fake or feint to that liver shot, which from a fighting standpoint, all that does is, on my side of things, emboldens me, and it encourages me to continue to push at that pain point, and it exposes you to more pain and more damage in other areas because you are so hyper focused on this one trauma that you experienced that now you forget, oh, he can punch me in the face, he can kick me, he can clinch me, he can tackle me, he can take me down, he can whatever, all because that one trauma to that liver has stuck with you so much that it's causing you to overreact to it in the future.
It's literally back to learned helplessness. Oh, shoot, he can hurt me.
Yeah.
I'm scared there, and it's opening up these other windows for you.
Yeah.
You make an interesting training point. I think that's missed a lot, where it's not just coming out and faking, it's letting them know this is what it looks like when bad things are about to happen. Now that they know that, I make it look like something bad's about to happen. You get that big, fast reaction.
Right.
And I will say that's probably the majority of people when you're talking training and sparring. But I've noticed when you get somebody who's really strong in their structure,
yep,
it's really hard to get them out of it and to make them make those big overreactions.
Yeah. I mean, overreacting at its core is a defense mechanism, right? Like that's what it is.
Yeah. It's our quick emotional response to not getting eaten by that lion, sort of thing.
Yeah. It's, it likely there's been something that has triggered an adrenal response, a cortisol response, something that has sent hormones coursing through my veins that tells me, hey, I'm in danger here. And while at our base level, that should engender some kind of fight or flight response. Mm-hmm. Over time, depending on what the trauma is or the trigger is or whatever, especially if it's repeated, we have a tendency to overreact to that thing, and from a sparring standpoint, that's really bad because I am trying to force those reactions. And so to your point, people that are really good at maintaining their structure, what does that mean? In life, maintaining your structure means, I think, being able to control your emotions, being able to understand that, okay, I've got a lot of stuff coming at me right now, but me overreacting, me over responding to it, me getting emotional about it is not going to help. And almost for sure, it's going to hurt. It's going to make things worse. Just like in a sparring context, if I know that my hands should be up and back and I should be moving my head and moving my feet, and the first sign of any sort of pain point causes me to get away from that,
right, then
I'm going to be exposed to a lot more trauma and a lot more damage, probably.
I want to answer your question and maybe lead us down a different path as well. You did. I mean, it wasn't meant for me, but I'm going to answer it anyway. You asked what structure was, and for you, controlling your emotions. And I'm going to give that a little more of a meaning that can extend even further out into life. And that's this idea of regression towards the mean, which is a term that Daniel Kahneman uses. We've looked at a few of his books before, Thinking Fast and Slow. And he gave this lecture about how praise works better than punishment to a group of flight instructors. And they all thought he was full of it. They were like, no, when a pilot does really well and I praise them, the next one is worse. Or when a pilot does terrible and I scream at them, the next one is better. Well, the argument is that was going to happen either way, because generally when you do one amazing thing, things all work out well, it looks really good, the likelihood that your next one is going to be that level or better it's not likely, because you're more likely to get closer to what your actual skill level is, whatever the actual average is. Similarly, when things all go wrong, you really mess up on one thing or another, you really miss the timing, you're really off, the likelihood that your next whatever is going to be way worse, likelihood devoid of other things, is it's more likely that you're going to go towards the mean.
Yeah.
Now, where that can get changed is our internal dialogue, our narrative around what happened.
Yeah. Well, I think as humans, we're hardwired to go to extremes because they're easier.
Yeah.
And we've kind of talked about this before. Life is mostly in the gray, but the problem with that is there's a lot of nuance in the gray, and extremes are not nuanced at all. It is, I don't have to think, and we see this a lot I think in society and in politics and whatever, some policy that maybe had an adverse effect, or something happened with some policy, or we have a failed shoe bomb attempt one time, and now all of a sudden everybody has to take off their shoes to get on a plane, because it's just easier to just say, okay, well, everybody's got to take off shoes.
Yes.
Instead of recognizing, okay, this one guy one time tried this, it didn't work, and I understand that if we just say everybody takes off their shoes, then there's a percentage of the population that's going to be happy with that, because now they feel safe. They're not any safer than they were before. They feel safe. And again, as humans, we are very driven by emotions.
We talk about this all the time, going to concerts and venues and different things that have all these safety measures.
It's eyewash. It's a joke. Like, it's literally, it's safety theater. It's designed to make people feel good about this. The reality is, it doesn't do anything. It deters
the rule followers,
right? Because if I'm a bad guy and I see you've got metal detectors or whatever, well, I'm not walking in with my 9mm on my hip. I'm going to, now you just made it easier for me to figure out how to circumvent this very thin veneer, this very superficial, again, theater of safety.
Safety theater, everyone.
Yeah.
Coming 2025.
So I think for the most part, overreacting, whether it's, in sparring or politics or whatever, communism, capitalism, whatever, it's almost always an emotional response. One of the first notes I wrote down.
Was this while I was doing the introduction?
And this is purely hypothetical. Okay. No real life example here whatsoever.
Don't trust him.
Let's say someone that gets hangry. Let's say someone that if they get hungry, it starts to affect, purely hypothetical.
Yep.
It starts to affect their mood, their behavior, the way that they engage with people, the way that they respond to people. What?
Nothing.
Hypotheticals. Okay.
I hear you.
No, but there's something to it.
There is.
You get some. If you're hungry, you get some very similar
there are scientific
hormonal responses to that. And I'm using this example because I learned very early on that certain people have a tendency to get hangry, and if you know this about people in your circle, you can work to preempt it, prevent it, right?
Yes, you can.
And so I think there's a larger lesson there, because now you're not overreacting, hypothetical,
sure.
You're not overreacting to being hungry, and I don't have to overreact in a response to that, because little things have been done on the front end to avoid it altogether.
Right. Well, and let's say you maybe have some personal experience with getting hangry. Were it to be, say, I don't know, me, I feel like I may have been making progress on identifying in life, I might be hungry. But what's funny is when I do, let's just call a spade here. When I do realize I'm hungry.
I totally had them going. They had no idea I was talking about you.
I'm sure they did. I didn't give it away at all. We've talked about my poker face. It helps the rational side, but it does not help that immediate side. there's still like I still feel the feelings so strongly,
Yeah.
even though my brain is telling me it's not that bad. You're just hungry. I can't I can't stretch those two apart. And it's I believe this was Kahneman as well. System 1 and system 2. System 1 makes those immediate jumps,
Mhm.
and then system 2 is the one that takes the time and processes and figures things out and that sort of thing. And so they exist at the same time.
Yeah.
And this was demonstrated in his book with an optical illusion, where there are lines and some have arrows on the end pointing inward and some have it looking outward, and those lines look to be different lengths, but they're actually the same length.
Yeah.
Yeah. System 1 is still going to show you that they look different lengths.
Yeah.
Even though system 2 is telling you, no, I know they're the same length.
Right.
So that's how it feels with me, where system 1 feels it so strongly, reacts so strongly, even though system 2 is like, have a protein bar, you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I'm not. The world is ending.
Yeah.
And then 10 minutes later, I'm like, oh, okay, you're right.
Uh-huh.
You were right, system 2.
Yeah, no, I mean, I use that example because the reality is, if we go back to like you were talking about the fighter pilot thing, there are broad strokes where we can talk about why, generally speaking, as humans, we overreact to things.
Mhm.
But then also, like, we can recognize in ourselves, kind of self-regulate, but then also acknowledge that people in our sphere have different reactions to different circumstances.
Right.
It's like coaching again. I know that there are certain people that will need to be pushed one way versus another. I know that there are certain people that if they get hit a little bit too hard, they're going to overreact. They're going to have an emotional, visceral response to that will manifest itself in not so healthy ways. And when you're trying to work through that with people, it's important as a coach to understand that, all right, I need to get them with folks that, one, recognize this, and two, that won't have also an immediate emotional, visceral response to that, because then it just causes this escalation of things. So having someone that is really good at keeping their structure, and I use structure very broadly now, not just talking about hands up and back,
Yeah.
but being able to control their emotions, understanding that it's not a personal attack coming from this other person, that it is something within them that is a problem. It's just I happen to be the one standing in front of them right now. I happen to be the one that triggered whatever this response is.
Yes.
Because I may or may not know that they got punched in the liver last week, and now they are terrified by it, and just the thought of getting punched in the liver causes them to lash out back at me. And so I think, one, on the self-regulating side, we have to acknowledge that, okay, we all have these things. There are certain things. For me, it's eye rolling. I have a very visceral response to someone rolling their eyes at me, and I can't pinpoint why that is.
Mhm.
I don't know what the genesis of it is. I just know that I have to really work to not have an immediate, like, I might murder you kind of a reaction to that. And so once we understand it, we acknowledge it, then we can work on it. And then I think too, we talked last time about community, having a community of people around you that can say, look, it's really not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
They didn't mean anything by this, or this is part of the process, or whatever. I don't think it's really them that you're mad at. It's this, or have a protein bar.
Yes.
A Snickers.
Both of those. Staying on this coaching, sparring topic.
Right.
We had a similar conversation in St. Louis when I was up there, when we were doing a lot of sparring rounds amongst coaches. And from there, it wasn't an emotional standpoint sort of thing. They weren't getting upset and angry and lashing out. It was that they had these responses that they kept doing. And we had to have a conversation about how to coach each other so that we could make our sparring more effective.
Mm-hmm.
If every time I kick you, you're dropping your hands and hitting with your arm, why is that happening? Is somebody kicking you too hard and you're scared or terrified?
Mm-hmm.
Or did you block incorrectly with your leg once and now you're never going to use your legs again. Like we need to figure out what happened, and then we need to help train that other person to see what they're doing and realize that they're making this big physical overreaction to something where it's unwarranted. But if we're not having focused training sessions, if we're just going in, touching hands, doing whatever we want for 3 minutes, going to the next person, touch hands, do whatever we want for 3 minutes, we're not really learning. We're not being intentional with what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so those overreactions just keep coming. They keep getting fed.
Right. And a lot of times I don't even know that I'm doing it.
Yes.
So if I don't have somebody in front of me that's one that they recognize it, and then that, you know, we have this open line of communication to where you can tell me what I'm doing, and then I don't overreact to that as well, right? Because the danger is not the right word, but
risk.
The risk of pointing out to someone that they are overreacting to a thing, it's almost like when you're trying to de-escalate and you tell somebody to calm down. You know, the immediate visceral response is, I am calm and don't tell me what to do.
Right.
You know, so
yes,
as a coach or a center owner or a business owner or a leader or a teacher or whatever, anybody in any sort of position of leadership, authority, whatever you want to say, you have to instill this environment, this culture where people feel the freedom to have conversations about things in that are happening in the environment without being worried about an emotional, angry reprisal from the other person. So if you and I are sparring and I keep catching you with the same thing, in order for that to be a beneficial lesson, right? And you hear kind of the cliche, well, I either win or I learn.
Right.
Well, that's not always true. You know, you only learn if you're intentional about it. You only learn if there's an environment established, if there's a precedent set for learning.
And actual learning, not, oh, yep, they can kick my ass, moving on.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, just because I recognize, well, you keep kicking me in the head, that doesn't mean I understand why it's happening.
Right.
You know, and so I need to be able to, even if it's, I say, hang on a second, what is it that I'm doing that is opening me up to that? And then on the flip side,
what are you doing?
it should be able to, I should be able to say, listen, I keep catching it in the head because every time I do this, you do that, without you getting offended by it and again, reacting emotionally to it.
Right. When I'm coaching, whether it's in a sparring or just in like a class format where someone's drilling something I taught, that sort of thing, I tend not to make any corrections the first time. And then the next time, if I see the same thing, maybe I'll wait one more time and just see if it's something that continues. Because again, I know as humans, yes, there's a tendency to overreact, but we also regress towards the mean. We also are going to have outliers in what we do.
Well, and I like to give people a chance to figure it out for themselves.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not always possible. When people overreact, a lot of times it has nothing to do with this immediate stimulus. It's just, that's the thing or the person that's right in front of me, and I'm acting out, I'm reacting to this in this moment, but it's really about something that happened to me this morning or yesterday or the day before, or it's about something that somebody said to me yesterday that I have not resolved, I have not addressed, and now all of a sudden here you are in my face and you say something or do something that is maybe peripheral or tangential to that previous trigger, trauma, whatever, and now I'm lashing out at you. You know, if we relate it back to sparring for a second, maybe I've had 3 rounds where I felt like, you know, people have gone a little harder than they should have. And then by the 4th round, you hit me with a nice stiff little jab that maybe if it was round 1, I wouldn't have thought much about.
Right.
But now all of a sudden it's like, I'm done with this shit, you know, And
I'm going to take the last 3 rounds of aggression out on you.
Yes. And now I'm going to retaliate, or I'm going to shut down, or I'm going to yell at you, or I'm going to quit, or whatever. And now it truly is an overreaction, because the immediate stimulus is not really the problem. It's just the thing that has triggered a previous past trauma, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. For the record, since we do have this heavy overlap between what we're doing here and training, there's nothing wrong with getting a quick touch hands and stepping out and just being, I need a minute, taking a second off to the side, trying to, that's the safest way to go for everybody involved, and that's going to be better for you long term in the training environment.
And I mean, that's true in life. If you and I are having a discussion, and I can tell that, or you can tell, or whatever, that it's heated, maybe one of us or both of us are at a heightened state of emotion for whatever reason, I think it's prudent to step away from that. If I recognize that this is not getting better, it's getting worse, then the odds of us reconciling that right now, while I'm experiencing an adrenal response, I've got cortisol running through my body, you're doing the same, you feel aggrieved for whatever reason, maybe I do as well, and it just continues to escalate. I think that's a really good response, is to not have a response in this moment in time. Yes. Let's chill for 15 and come back to this, or 30, or whatever it is, because just like on the physical side of things, if we just keep going back and forth, tit for tat, the odds are it gets worse, not better.
Right.
And so being able to step away, I think, is an important kind of mechanism to have, and to acknowledge for both sides, to understand that I'm not running away from this discussion. I'm not running away from this sparring session. I am recognizing that if the goal is to have a productive conversation or a productive training session, we're not there right now.
Right. And it's not going to happen in this environment, in this moment.
Yes.
I'm going to make a big stretch. I don't think it's a big jump, but it'll probably sound like it. Are you familiar with the 1983 Soviet nuclear false alarm incident?
I am, actually.
I kind of figured you would be. For those who aren't, like myself, who learned about it this morning. No, not this morning.
Is her way of saying that I'm old and she's not.
I was going to say something, but I didn't. Stanislav Petrov was monitoring the Soviets' early nuclear warning system. His role was to evaluate incoming data. It reported that a missile had been launched at the USSR from the US. And per instructions, if that were to happen, he is supposed to immediately counterattack, immediately send a missile of his own, basically ensuring World War III. I mean, that was part of the understanding.
Yeah.
And later on, it would show that there were another 4 coming at him. And so he did not launch the counterattack.
Yeah.
And he cited a few reasons why he was able to conclude it was a false alarm. One was through just military intelligence, understanding that if this was to happen, nuclear assault, it wouldn't just be
They're not sending
one, and then it wouldn't just be 4, right? It would be a whole onslaught.
Yeah.
So he realized that didn't make sense. And he also said, and these are obviously in interviews 10 years later, because he was not a hero at that moment.
Yeah.
He said he had a funny feeling in his gut, and he didn't want to assume the responsibility for unleashing the Third World War.
Right.
So he had this very stressful moment where it would have been very easy to just see that data, react, oh shit,
right,
launch them.
Yep.
And he was able to take a second, rationalize. And it's funny because fear is part of why he was able to do that. Having the fear of starting this nuclear war made him really consider the gravity of the situation and look at the details like he needed to.
Yeah.
That system 2 engaging.
Right. Well, it's being able to think critically under stress.
Yes.
Problem solve in real time. Recognize that while on paper it's very black and white. If this happens, I do this. That's not how the real world works. This is why, and I wholly understand that it has gained, meme status at this point. This is why it depends.
Yeah.
Is so true, not just in fighting and self-defense or whatever, but just in life. If you present to me a very black and white set of circumstances, I'm probably still going to have half a dozen questions before I will give you a response. And your response to those questions is probably going to engender more questions from me. I think that's the way it's supposed to be. Now, we can get bogged down in that, right? And at some point, we've talked about this previously, at some point, I just have to make a decision. I just have to act.
Right.
And as the stakes are higher, like it doesn't get any higher than the stakes in this case, this would be the end of the world.
I was about to say, as a world, as a whole,
So, but again, he had a very clear directive.
Yeah.
If this happens, you do this.
And from the Soviet Union, a black and white directive.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm amazed I'm alive, truthfully. And it was like a sun glare on a satellite kind of thing that made it look like it's wild.
Yeah. But being able to sit there and analyze and think through, okay, I understand that this is what it says, and I understand that this is what we're showing.
Yeah.
However, does this really make sense? And we've talked about this in especially like written communication, texts, emails, things like that, not being able to read tone or attaching our own tone or emotions to a text.
Right.
This is similar in that if you send me a text and I attach my emotions to it, and instead of just reading the text for what it is and then thinking critically about that, instead of just giving an emotional visceral response to it, overreacting to a thing that may not be a thing at all. And I'm saying it in very simplistic terms. And I do think it's one of these simple, not easy kind of things based on what your day looks like, based on, again, if we go back to sparring, if I got caught in the liver last week, I'm much more likely to have an overreaction to somebody going to my liver today. If I got a text last week that led to an argument or whatever, and today I get a similar text but from a different person, I may be quicker to respond emotionally and aggressively and or more tersely or whatever,
right?
Even though you have nothing to do with what happened last week. This text has nothing to do with what happened last week.
I'm going to share the Key and Peele, I think that's who it was, skit that one of our listeners, David, sent us, because it is perfect in terms of how far you can get off when you're interpreting and assuming tone. You mentioned assumptions, and we started with the it depends conversation and how you have a lot more questions. You need a lot more information. And I think if most people are honest with themselves, if you look at something that you have a lot of knowledge in and think about someone just asking you one question, if you really want to answer it, you're going to have a lot more questions for them. If I message my friend who's a nurse and I say, hey, my blood pressure's high, what's wrong with me?
Right.
She's not going to say, oh, well, it's this.
Right.
She has no idea. She's going to ask about my diet. She's going to ask about exercise. She's going to ask about family history. There are so many more questions that you have to ask so that you don't have to make assumptions.
Yes.
Because the more assumptions you make, the wilder, the more overreacting it ends up. It's the WebMD paradox, where you put in one symptom and now it could be cancer, or it could be that you stubbed your toe last night on the coffee table, or
Well, and you see this all over social media.
Of course.
The people that are the most fervent about a topic or a subject are generally the ones that know the least about it. The hardliners, the black and white, yes, they are definitive, and they are the ones that actually are more likely to ridicule and demean people with experience who are like, well, it could be this, it could be that. What about this? What about that? Have you looked into blah, 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 whatever? Because they're trying to get to a real root cause of the problem, because again, it's not if this, then that.
Right.
There is a virtually infinite number of reasons that somebody's blood pressure could be high. And so if it's like, Well, if somebody puts their hands around your throat, how would you deal with it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, where are we? What are we standing on? Am I armed? Or are they armed? Is there more than
Yeah.
one person with them? Is there more than one person with me? Am I holding my child? I could do that forever,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And so people that are quick to just blurt out things are generally, again, the ones that know the least about them, or they have some emotional response to it because of a thing that happened to them. It's like the person that you should least likely learn how to deal with a gunfight from is the one that was just in a gunfight.
Yeah.
You know, because
this is what I did. It
this
worked
is
for
what
me,
I did.
and
It
now
worked for me. This is what
this
you
must
should
be
do.
the only thing that
Yes.
anyone ever should do.
Yes.
Right. Well, and this is where, going back to our conversation about community, how it can be really great, but also a big detriment. If you go to a community and you give, what do I do if somebody's hands are on my throat? They're going to start giving you answers,
Mhm.
but they don't know the whole story.
Mhm.
And not to keep harping on it, but this is back to my grappling group vendetta that I apparently have. Somebody will comment, people in my gym are going too hard with me.
Mhm.
And somebody will probably say, you know, you need to talk to them, tell them to tone it down, like you should be safe.
Right.
And I'm like, maybe you're the problem.
Yes.
I don't know what's going on. Maybe
Yes.
you're going to, maybe you're bringing that out in people. What are
Yes.
you doing wrong? What's the environment? Maybe you knew on sign up, hey, we go hard.
Yes.
And now you can't be upset because it's too hard or
Right.
whatever, you know?
Yeah. No, and you know, you do see that. I mean, you see that in sparring, you see that in rolling, whatever. At some point, if it's everybody else, it's you. You know, and if you are constantly being put in a position where you feel like everybody else is going too hard, it's probably you that are cultivating that kind of an experience, that kind of a response. And we've talked about that before. You know, sometimes, well, one, you're an adult, have a conversation.
Right.
Two, but sometimes dial it down the other way.
Yeah.
You know,
we should use always and never as flags for ourselves.
Yeah.
That shouldn't sound right to you. Why am I always the one getting injured, or, you know, that sort of thing?
And
you either have the wrong perspective, because that's not true. It's not always,
Right.
or there's something going on and you have control over it.
Yeah.
Not you're the problem. You have control.
Yeah. And as a coach, you know, I have to be able to say, okay, is it really always?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always. No. Is it really always? Like every time you spar with anyone, they go too hard. And if the answer is yes, then almost for sure it's you.
We know the common thread.
It's
Yeah.
something that you are creating, cultivating, whatever. And maybe it's because you're afraid that somebody's going to go too hard, which forces you to overreact.
Mm-hmm.
You know, well, I'm going to go hard before they get a chance to, you know, and it may not even be a conscious thing. It may be a subconscious thing where this is my defense mechanism. I am so afraid, especially if I've had a bad experience with this person before. I may not even know that I'm going hard, but I'm starting out because I'm already worried about it.
Yeah.
I'm overreacting to a thing that happened last week, you know, and now it becomes a self-fulfilling thing. I'm almost for sure going to create a circumstance where we're all going to go too hard. And so again, it's like we're having an argument, a discussion or whatever. The best thing to do is for us to walk away from it in this moment in time. And then maybe we come back and have a real discussion about, this is what I'm feeling. This is why I'm feeling it. I'm not saying it's you. I'm saying there's something about our interaction
right now, in this
yes.
moment or in this place.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's causing an overreaction. And I'm not sure why that is.
Yeah.
Let's figure it out.
Going back to the text thing.
Yeah.
You see the text and you interpret it in a way. And a lot of times we can identify the feeling we get from that because we've chosen whatever tone to assign it. Even if you know, if you know there's a certain tone behind it because of your experience with this person in person, it's a text.
Yeah.
If you can control what emotions you have, let that go.
Right.
Just, if we're going to assume something, let's assume it's just a nonchalant throwaway comment, ignore it, go on. And then if I see you in person and you're doubling down on it, okay, now's the time to address it.
Yeah, because in a text or an email or whatever, like I have to take time to look at it, read it, ascribe an emotion to it, then physically type a response and press send. It's not like we're sitting here face to face and you call me a name, and my immediate response is to call you a name back.
Or I roll my eyes and you murder me.
Don't do it.
I'm not.
I'm working on it.
I've resisted already.
I've been working on it.
I can tell because I'm still alive. So within that last course of discussion, we were talking about assumptions.
Mhm.
And are you familiar with Occam's razor?
Oh, yeah.
I figured, especially being in a medical type background. What I didn't know, what I learned looking up Occam's razor to talk about it, was the razor part of it. Like I understood what it was. And so it was described as a philosophical tool for shaving off unlikely explanations. And I was like, oh, that's clever. Anyway, I'd never seen why it was called that. So Occam's razor is the best explanation of something is the one that makes the fewest assumptions. And it comes back to that conjunction fallacy where we were talking about Linda as a bank teller and a feminist movement person. So if that's the case, the best option is the one that makes the fewest assumptions. It just makes sense that we need to get information so we don't have to make assumptions.
It's I went to vote was that last week?
Yeah. Oh, it's time to find out if your vote counted.
So I went to vote, and in North Carolina you have to show a photo ID, and they take your ID and then they say, okay, what's your name, what's your address? And so I did this, and they pull up in the little notebook and it says that I'd already voted. And I said, well, I haven't. And I said, I don't early vote ever. I'm always.
Don't tell them why. I already ruined it. Go for it.
I don't early vote because I don't want to vote a month and a half in advance, and then somebody dies, or somebody that I was going to vote for does something completely crazy, and now there's no taking that back. So I wait until election day to vote. And so, they said, well, it's showing you voted curbside. And she kind of looks me up and down, and she's like, that doesn't sound right. Because curbside generally is for people that they can't get out of their car. They're, whatever. So I'm like, I didn't vote. So I have to do the provisional ballot, blah, 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 whatever. And so I made a post about it on social media, and people immediately start ascribing
some kind of conspiracy to it. Sure.
And, my immediate response is it's the easiest, simplest, most likely explanation is somebody just was incompetent.
Right.
Like somebody just didn't do their job properly.
Human error.
Yes.
Highly probable.
Like that is much
and
almost
the fewest assumptions.
Infinitely more likely than some grand scheme to give the vote that I would have cast to someone else.
Yeah.
I mean, beyond that, I don't want to get into
the
whole
so
thing.
On the pendulum swing here, on the overreaction sides, government can't do anything.
Right.
And
they're so good at it that they can
rig elections,
mount this massive election rigging campaign. You can't have it both ways.
Right.
You cannot say that government is the most ineffective, inefficient, incompetent means for accomplishing anything, and then also say, however, they are so clever and so adept that they can organize, plan, and execute a massive voter harvesting campaign to steal an election. You can't be both. It just can't. It can't. And so Occam's razor, I think, here is perfect. I don't think there's somebody out there trying to steal my vote. I think somebody just didn't do their job right.
Right. Yeah. Yep. Easy. Simple.
Yeah.
And, there's plenty of logical fallacies around why it's hard to get to just the simplest thing.
Sure.
But biases and everything.
But in this context, we're already in an emotionally charged environment.
Yes.
Where politically we're very polarized. We're already on extremes,
Yeah.
And so...
Well, and those extremes are enhanced by red and blue Democrat or Republican, trying to make these hard lines, and there's not a lot of room for the people in the middle, the independents, the undecideds. To anyway.
Well, I mean, again, life isn't great, whatever. The reality is, in that context, most of us are in the purple,
right?
Yes. But the hardliners are the ones that get the attention. And so when I'm constantly just hearing they're going to steal the election, they're going to steal the election, they're going to steal the election, whoever they is.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden somebody's got my vote, I automatically go to. Now, the funny thing is, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds with this, but the funny thing is, almost anybody that commented, and I had some people reach out to me privately as well. Mm-hmm. They were clearly intimating that one particular side would have been trying to take my vote. After the election went the way it did, miraculously, nobody had anything to say about my vote anymore.
Strange.
Because again,
I mean, your one popular vote.
It doesn't make, if you remove yourself from it, it doesn't make sense. Yeah. If I'm no longer in this emotionally charged environment, that's why the idea of stepping away from an argument or stepping away from a sparring session that's gotten super heated is a good idea sometimes, because I can remove myself from this emotionally charged environment, let my adrenal response drop, let my cortisol levels go back down, think rationally, self-regulate, think about, why did I get upset in that moment in time? Was it really about them or that circumstance, or was it something else? And now I can come back to it and address it in a way that is not emotionally charged, that is not based on, some past trauma or whatever. Or, I walk away and I have a Snickers and then I come back.
My high school AP psychology teacher was famous for relating situation and disposition, for using this one example, and then throughout the year would just insert it in where needed. And he would say, okay, you're on your way to work and you get a flat tire. What's the situation? And he would say, an air containing device no longer contains air.
Yeah.
Well, there's no reason to get worked up, upset, angry. Like, that's just that. Okay. That's, so innocuous. But then when it's, well, I'm going to be late for work, my boss is going to be angry, I'm going to be late on this project. And then we start the learned helplessness, the 3 Ps, our cognitive distortions. Yep. Yes, we assign all of that to it. That's our disposition.
Yeah.
And if we can take disposition out of it and look at the situation, somebody put their glove on my face. Okay, well,
which is literally what we're here to do.
Yeah.
You're actually paying. You're actually paying to have that done to you.
You sure are.
And so if I can pluck myself out of it for a second,
sure,
and look at it that way, like, this is literally what I'm doing, a thing called kickboxing or wrestling, or whatever it is. This is literally the thing that I showed up to do. This is literally a thing that I get money drafted out of my account every month for, to have somebody punch me in the face, so I get better at keeping somebody from punching me in the face.
Yeah.
That was a lesson that I just got. That was a lesson that I paid for.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like it because maybe it hurt. Maybe it just hurt my ego. Maybe it brought me back to last week when I caught that liver shot, and I'd never experienced that before, and I don't really want to experience it again. Whatever it is. But if you boil it down just to the bare bones, what's happening right now, I showed up this morning. I got out of bed. I put my gear in my bag. I put on this certain attire. I drove 25 minutes to this place where I have previously signed multiple waivers which say this is dangerous shit. And then I go place my shoes somewhere. I put on my shin guards. I put on my boxing gloves. I get out on the mats. I listen to the instructions that are being given by the coach. I see the timer. I know that once we touch hands, you're going to try to punch me and I'm going to do the same to you. And then I get mad because that happened to me.
Yep.
So I have to be able to look at it and say, is that really why I'm mad?
Yeah.
Is that the true impetus, Or is that just the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back? Why am I overreacting to this thing that otherwise might be completely innocuous to me, something that I wouldn't have given any attention to whatsoever? What is causing me to have this response right now?
Well, and already, even getting to the step where you acknowledge there's something else is an important part of this progression.
Yes.
Because there are some people who say, oh, I just reacted.
Yes.
That was just how I reacted.
Yes.
No, there's something else going on. You might not know why.
Yeah.
I might not be able to figure it out as a coach. Right. You might need a different profession there. I don't know, but there's something.
Yeah. And
when
maybe you figure it out tomorrow.
Right.
You know?
In the shower is where I learned
you're
most of my
having
lessons.
a conversation with somebody else, and you're talking about your day and blah 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 whatever, and you're like, and then you have this kind of epiphany about why it happened, and then all of a sudden you're like, God, I was an asshole. Now you start feeling bad because of the way you responded, because you recognize that it really didn't have anything to do with them, and this is outside of the scope of what we're talking about, but like as a functioning adult in society, I should be willing and able to go back to that person and be like, yesterday when I acted the way that I did, it really wasn't about this. I did feel like in that moment maybe you hit me a little harder than I was prepared for, but it really was about something else going on. And whether I want to have that discussion or not is a different story. But I think I shouldn't leave it to that other person to think that they
just had something else going on, right? Yeah.
Or that they did something wrong and they really didn't.
And they're beating themselves up. Yes. And the conversation is so important. And again, that's where the learning, that's where the growth is. Yeah. Not just going in and doing it. Anyone can just go in and do it.
Right. Again, if let's say I went to work out, I went to lift before I came here, right? Well, what is my goal for lifting? Why am I here? Am I here just because
it's 9 o'clock and I'm supposed to?
Right.
And, yeah.
Okay. If that's the case, if that's true, then I'm probably wasting my time. If there's no intent behind why I'm doing this, why I'm here, it's the planning.
Yes.
And if I don't go in with a plan, if I don't go in with a program, if I don't go in with at
least a goal too. Yeah.
Well, and I have to start there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Why am I going to the gym to begin with?
Right.
Is it an escape? Do I want, to put on 15 pounds of muscle? Do I want to lose 15 pounds of fat?
Setting your intention.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do I need to get my blood pressure down? Whatever it is. And then once I do that, I can come up with that program or that plan or have somebody else do it for me or whatever it is. If I don't do any of those things, I'm literally just wasting my time, and I'm wasting my energy and my effort and my money and all these other things. So again, like if I show up for a boxing session or a kickboxing session or a jiu-jitsu session or whatever, and my goal is to be better when I leave there, then there needs to be intent, there needs to be communication, and that I need to understand that this person standing in front of me is vital to that, and vice versa. I don't get better without them, they don't get better without me. And so as much as possible, having that intent in mind should at least lend itself towards less overreacting when things don't necessarily go the way that I expected them to. And we've talked about expectations before. Expectations can be a real problem in just life in general.
Yes.
And that's important when we're talking about a training environment. That's important for coaches to make sure that they're establishing realistic expectations for themselves. As a coach, right. I need to be able to look out in a room and see, okay, well, I've got people that, they've been here for 3 weeks. I have very different expectations for them than I'm going to have in my next class for people that I've seen for 5 years.
Yes. Well, and sometimes even stating those expectations, especially if we're going into a sparring match, I'm not watching to see who's hitting the hardest so I can give them an award.
Yeah.
I'm not looking, I want to see who's starting to apply some lessons that we did today, or I want to see the footwork that we did, and setting that expectations from the front so they don't think they have to Wreck-It Ralph everybody.
Yeah.
So I'm going to connect this to something called prospect theory, which is in an economic mindset. Just if you only have gain as options, you're more risk averse. When you have options where they're all bad, or you have the potential to lose really big, you tend to be more risk seeking. You'll take the risk. So from like a monetary standpoint, if you have $1 million and in one case you could stand to get 1 million, or you could get 4 million, or lose everything. And then another option is that you could get 2 million, just kind of even cut it through. Well, you could, if you only have 1 million and you could basically stand to lose it or get it, you're going to go and you're going to play it safe. But if you have a lot more money, let's say you have $4 million and everything is pretty much loss or maybe breaking it even, you're going to take the bigger risk to keep what you have, to get what you have, and avoid the loss. If you're going into a training session, I'm tying this all together, I promise. I know the numbers and they're over, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds with it, but
it's okay. I already went somewhere completely different with this now.
Okay, well,
keep going.
Cool. I go into the match. If I'm thinking about gains and making progress, I'm going to have less of a tendency to overreact, to take those big leaps, to take those big jumps, because I know that growth is coming from this session. Rather than if I go into it thinking, if I get hit, I'm going to lose face, I'm going to look bad in front of my instructor. I mean, like, the losses are huge. Now I'm going to take those bigger swings, make those bigger jumps. And I could be wrong about all of this. That could also be the name of the podcast, probably. But looking at it as a gain and loss mentality, moving in to control what our emotions and our reactions look like. It's similar to what you said earlier, the I either win or I learn type mindset. But it's not a let's see what happens, touch hands, oh, I'm getting beat, oh, I must be learning. It's a going into it, I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm gaining. Not just win or learn. Like, no, it's both. Learning is winning is winning. That's what we're doing.
So my head immediately jumped to when you started talking about the million and the 4 million and whatever. Obviously, I it depends is kind of my thing. For me, in that example, the way you got the $1 million is going to dictate what you're willing to do with it.
Sure.
If I worked 30 years in a manufacturing plant to save up that $1 million, I am probably much less likely to risk it big than if I won it in a lottery last week.
You're correct. Yeah.
You know,
I agree.
And so I think there's a training parallel there as well. If I come in, go ahead. Oh,
I was thinking if I worked really hard to get to the level where I am at now, and somebody comes in and they've been there a week and they're kicking my tail, I'm like, the emotions, the reactions to that, even though their skill and ability has nothing to do with me.
Well, that's a whole other thing. But I do think it's important because we start overreactions. A lot of times are based on comparisons. You know, and so when
famously the thief of joy.
Yeah. So when we start comparing, you know, what we have or what we're doing or whatever, to it goes back to the Ford Escape. You know, I'm super excited about this new blue Ford Escape that I just got, and then all of a sudden I see a bunch of them and I'm less excited about it. Well, why? You know, and so if I have put in the time and energy and effort to gain this certain set of skills, and I have this level of expectations for what I should be able to do, but then all of a sudden this 18-year-old comes in that is extremely athletically gifted, probably fearless, willing to take risks, willing to kind of just balls to the wall, full send it, because they haven't invested that kind of time and energy and effort into a thing. I am more likely to have an overreaction to that kind of a response. Now I start questioning everything that I've put into this, even though it has nothing to do with that.
That has nothing to do with it. So I, for those who don't know, my degrees are in economics and accounting. Primarily economics is what I claim. And when you're playing with supply and demand and opportunity costs and all these different things, the standard is all other things being equal, because you just can't calculate all of the variables that are truly involved. And when you said, well, how did we get that 1 million? That is absolutely valid. And the economist's answer is, well, we're not looking at that right now. We have to focus on this one thing and set everything else being equal. And the problem is that's just not how things work.
Well, and the reality is everything else is never equal.
That too.
You know?
Well, yeah.
In life.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about economy.
No,
I'm not talking.
yeah. Variables are all there.
Yes.
There's really no mitigating for them.
Obviously, everyone is going to, based on their life experiences, whatever, they're going to view these things differently. But I think it is almost indisputable that I am much more likely to risk a thing that I didn't work for than I am to risk a thing that I worked really hard for.
No, absolutely. So when I was coming up with this episode title, and we'll still see what I end up calling it, because we're talking about overreaction, overcompensation works, overdetermination,
Right.
like all of these, it's all the same, it's all different, just extremes. Yeah.
I think people have figured out by now that we drift.
We do.
You know?
we do.
But that's life. Again, it's
yeah.
There is overlap in life, you know, and when you start trying to hard line things, you'll find out real fast that it just doesn't work that way.
No. So we'll see what I end up calling this episode. Very curious myself. I want to close it out with one other idea, and I'm going to preface this by saying this could be a whole other episode in itself, and it might be our next one.
Oh, this might be a two-parter already.
I know. Well, just saying, we can leave them hanging. Optimism tends to lead to overconfidence. And we just talked about learning optimism and it being a better alternative than learning helplessness.
Yeah.
But then it kicks us over into this whole other set of problems. And I think this is a common idea that as a human condition, funny joke, and then also when you really think about it, pretty difficult. That's the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. But the definition of perseverance is doing the same thing over and over again until you get a different result.
Yeah.
And it's a human condition type to know when to grit down and know when to quit.
Yeah.
And understand where optimism is beneficial and where it can get you in trouble.
Know when to fold them, know when to hold them.
There we go.
Know when to walk away, know when to run.
On that note, let's walk away. That's our look at overreaction, overcompensation, a little bit of everything. If you enjoyed this discussion, please leave us 5 stars, follow, share, all that good stuff. Subscribe on Spotify. Guys, we are doing so well. We are progressing. We are reaching new people each time. Please help us keep that momentum going so we can offer more things like the Life is Mostly in the Gray sticker, which is now up on secondplana.com. If you didn't enjoy this conversation, keep it to yourself or tell all your friends how terrible it is and send it to them to listen. Either way, thanks for listening to Second Plan A, and we look forward to growing with you next time.
Thanks, everybody.